Hello and welcome to Cult Movie Cult, where we watch and discuss the horrific, the obscure, and the flat-out strange from the other side of cinema. I'm Marc Dickerson.
And I'm Jeremy Fink, and this is the second episode in our series Practically Terrifying, a celebration of 80s creature features. Today we're discussing a bit of a deep cut, 1983's The Deadly Spawn, directed by Douglas McKeown, starring Charles George Hildebrandt, Gene Taffler, and Richard Porter, among others. The film follows the story of a crash-landed alien that finds refuge in the basement of a house and grows to monstrous proportions, eating those unlucky enough to cross its path. A handful of teenagers try to survive the onslaught of the creature and its young.
What was that?
First, there was the invasion of the body snatchers. Then there was Alien. Now there is the Deadly Spawn. It began with a meteor crashing to Earth. No one knew the mystery of the mutant spores it contained. Now they are free. They will grow and reproduce rapidly, eating anything and anyone in their path.
I heard something.
The Deadly Spawn. The nightmare is just beginning.
Yes, certainly more of a deep cut here than the first episode. A movie that I've always heard about. I really just heard the title, The Deadly Spawn. So it came out in 1983, and I guess this is essentially an 80s edition of our series about practical effects in horror movies. So we're only going to be talking about the 80s. So now we're in 1983. Last one was 1981. And the Deadly Spawn, it's just one of those movies that I've always seen the poster, and I've always seen, like, I don't know, just that main image of the spawn themselves, I guess. Those little... Jeremy used a word. I really shouldn't use it here probably, but it's really the only way to describe them. Spermy would be like the word. Yeah, so... kind of like spermy looking creatures. So I was familiar with the image of it, but that's really all I knew. But I was very pleasantly surprised. So we don't often do this, Jeremy, but this is a example of a film that neither of us have actually seen. Well, hadn't actually seen until we watched it for this show. And I'm very glad I did. And it was I went into it completely blind. Really didn't know anything about it. How about you? Did you know much about this film before watching it? Or?
No, I had not even heard of this film, honestly. I feel like I've probably stumbled across the image and maybe heard the name The Deadly Spawn at some point, but it almost sounds like, it sounds like one of those names for a movie that they you would see parodied on like a kid's cartoon on their Halloween episode or something like that.
Right.
Like it's just one of those classically... kind of bizarro horror film creature names, and it's like, I really knew nothing about this film. We kind of came across this when doing research for this series and decided to take a chance on it. And I'm really glad that we did. Yeah,
same here. We're going more now to the lower budget side of things. Whereas, as we had a big Hollywood film last time that is still a cult film, but just much more well known and had a lot more money behind it and things like that.
Probably that scene in American Werewolf in London where they shut down that big square in the center of London. Probably shooting that
Piccadilly Circus.
Probably shooting that cost 10 times this entire movie's budget.
Yeah. Do you have the budget on hand? I'm putting you on the spot here.
The number I'm seeing is $25,000. Obviously, with movies like this, where it's pretty obscure and wasn't a huge success at the time, there's not as much record keeping. So someone, that's from Wikipedia. So someone definitely could have just made that number up and written it down. Though it seems about realistic. Given
it makes sense.
With inflation, you're probably looking at. I can't calculate inflation, but I'm guessing probably close to $75,000 now, maybe, or $60,000. Somewhere in that range.
Right.
Which you could make a movie like this for $60,000 today. So I think
definitely,
sounds about right.
Yeah. So this was, I would put this one in the category of homemade horror, which I was saying to Jeremy before could be its own series on the show, which, I would actually love to do that as a series. Although there's, again, so many, hundreds of ideas that we haven't even gotten to yet that we've wanted to do. But homemade horror is something that, it's very niche, but it's out there. If you dig around for it, this I would put in that category. Also, the movie Things. Have you ever seen Things?
I don't think I have.
Oh, gotta see Things. It's so good. We need to talk about that probably on the show at some point.
I'll make a note of that one.
It's very low. It's like shot in your uncle's house on the weekend, low budget. Anyway, we'll talk about that possibly down the road. But it definitely reminded me of that film. And again, this is another movie that we hadn't seen. So first impressions, I mean, just to get that out of the way. So what did you think about this movie, about The Deadly Spawn?
I thought it was, just really fun, like really kind of wacky. I mean, it definitely wears its budget on its sleeve a little bit. It's clearly, or at least I say clearly, obviously, we unfortunately can't talk to the filmmaker. I see that he actually passed away last year, so rest in peace. But
there's very little information about the making of this movie as well.
Yeah, and this was his only film. But I would venture to guess that this movie probably started with the creature or the desire to do a creature.
And built around the creature.
They kind of built around it, which is really fun because it's kind of so hard to imagine someone doing that today. It's like you might have an idea for a creature, but this one it really seemed like it was like they decided they wanted to make this thing and then built a movie around it, and that's
right.
That's,
homemade, exactly.
Homemade,
and it's a cool looking creature. It's pretty unique, honestly. You don't really see too many creatures out there like it. So, so there's really not much in the way of plot. Even for our show, that's saying something. So we'll get into it even less than we normally do. It's more like the movie to me was more like a series of these horror set pieces, sort of, which is very B movie and fun, which is like what the movie is really. And again, also low budget. The plot's there merely to kind of string along these violent horror scenes that. Like, hey, check out these cool scenes we shot with this creature. It kind of has that feel to it, but I mean that in a good way. Like, I mean that like you can feel the enthusiasm, for the creature and the scenes that they shot with.
Yeah.
Like it's all an excuse just to get to these scenes, and which I'm fully on board with, really. And I will say, Jeremy, that I enjoy movies that take place also in a short period of time.
Yeah.
Like one day or a couple hours or something like that, and also like in one location, which is pretty much what this film is. It all takes place in this one house for the most part, which is a great idea for lower budget films. I think we've talked about this before on the show. Just coming from filmmaking background, being resourceful is a huge thing when you're making movies.
Well, in all likelihood, probably the house of the director or a crew member
or a relative,
if
something like that. Which reminds me of Things, because I mean I've had those weekends where I'm like, hey, we have the house, let's shoot a movie,
let's just do something.
Like I didn't have a creature, I wish I did, but so the very beginning really gets you right into the film. It's it actually, I believe it's a matte painting, isn't it?
I
first
think
shot
so.
that we see. It's like it's pretty like beautiful. I mean, I love matte paintings. It's like I just one of those things I love. Which another thing that you don't see anymore, but
no,
it has this sort of like majestic feel to it, but it's we're outside and there's two people camping. And like right off the bat, it just put me in this like another time and place. I don't know what it was about it. Just something about that opening, and a meteorite comes crashing down, and you see the silhouette. You don't see it yet, but you see like a silhouette of some kind of alien creature, and it proceeds to eat, I guess, the two campers. So, and then now this is followed up by another scene, takes place in a basement. And again, similarly, we see the silhouette of the creature again. And so somehow it's gotten inside the house. I don't know if they really explore that too much, how that happened, but
they don't need to.
They don't need to, exactly. Yeah.
It got inside,
It slithered its way.
Yeah.
And somehow got inside. And there are some more gruesome murders in the scene. It ends up being the parents of the two main kids, the two main stars of the film, I guess you would call them. It was Charles. The two names, Charles. Was it Sam, the other kid?
I believe so.
I believe I wrote this down somewhere. It's kind of hard to keep track because it's just a bunch of kids at one point.
The names are also not really said or that often or given that much importance. It's kind of like you recognize the face, you understand what they're running from.
Yeah. I mean, Charles stood out to me because he's like the younger brother.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't know what they were trying to do with his character necessarily, but he's very like single-minded and he almost seems like not oblivious to what's going on, but he knows how to handle himself. It seems like
I kind of got the sense watching that character and now learning a little bit about the director Douglas McKeown. Douglas McKeown I'm seeing here, it looked like he was born in 1947, which means that he was kind of about that age, right at the peak of 50s B horror movies, which we'll get into more. But I kind of got the sense that maybe he inserted a younger version of himself in this film.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I like the idea of that character, or the two characters, like the two brothers, being pretty different from each other. Mm-hmm. The one is really into old sci-fi movies and creature effects and all of that, and then the other brother is like very logical and I forget exactly. Yeah, scientist, right? Exactly. Yeah. Very studious and all of that. So those are like the two main characters, and but before I get too into that, so there's the two scenes right up front, Jeremy, that are kind of like I actually was impressed that they had 4 deaths like that right off the bat. A lot of thrown blood. There's a lot of like blood thrown at the wall, which I liked. Again, resourceful. There's some crunching sounds, just like that. We're not really showing anything yet. They weren't gonna. I mean, the movie is about the creature, like we said, so they didn't want to be too early with showing it, I'm sure. And I love the arm on the shoulder when the wife goes down to check on the husband, and it kind of reminded me of the scene in Jurassic Park where the arm falls on the person and they turn around. But
did Steven Spielberg steal that from the Deadly Spawn? We don't know.
That's what we're gonna answer today. No.
Yeah.
I wish we knew, but
we can't say he didn't. So
Right. He might have come across this film. Who knows?
It's definitely possible.
And then the arm. So when she turns around, it's like sticking out of the creature's mouth, and the mouth of this thing, the creature itself. So the creature itself actually reminds me a lot of Audrey 2, who we're going to be talking about later in the series, the man-eating plant from Little Shop of Horrors. I saw a lot of similarities actually between them. So we'll discuss that later, I'm sure. But the jaw of this thing is really cool looking. Like I guess jaws, like multiple jaws.
Yeah.
And there's some POV shots from inside the jaws too that were pretty cool. Again, just like you could tell they were experimenting with like different ways that they could show these horror scenes, these gruesome deaths that we see right off the bat. And again, so then we're introduced to our two main characters, the skeptic wannabe scientist character and his sci-fi monster-loving younger brother. The younger brother is Charles. And it's kind of cool because you see these scenes right off the bat, and so something's going on, something's killing people, and it's in their house, like it's right underneath them in the basement, but they don't know that, and that's kind of like a cool, like it's suspenseful for even if they weren't really trying to write an amazing story or anything. I thought that was a cool way to like set it up, like we think our parents are going on this trip, but really that they got killed by this monster.
I really like the opening too, because and I guess back then it maybe would have been a little different because horror conventions weren't as firmly established as they kind of are today, but traditionally in a horror movie it's very common you have your kind of opening kill scene, And then you're introduced to the main characters, and the main characters, when we're introduced to them, are in a kind of inconsequential situation, getting up, just going about their normal day, whatever. And this movie really kind of sets that up like it's going to be like that, because we have this first kill scene in the woods, and then you see this other couple, and it's like, oh, they're just kind of hanging out. He's going, he's kind of checking some stuff out. And at least for me, I was expecting him to go down to the basement and maybe see a sign of something scary and
see something,
and then,
but run back up,
see, or run up, or kind of like not notice it, or maybe we as the audience see something but he doesn't see it.
Right. I did not expect there to be two more murders.
I was like, all right, we're like, this is unhinged.
I am strapped in. I am ready for this. And
then there's just more and more people coming in. You see a kid, you see like an old woman. It was like you kind of just don't know where this thing is going, and it's like
a bunch of old women actually, because she goes to her mother's house or whatever.
And it's like, it's a movie like this, it's not spending crazy amounts of time in character development, but I think one of the hardest things to do with horror movies is to make them unpredictable. It's like they can become so formulaic. You're just, who's going to survive to the end. Who's going to, be killed first. And in this one, I really, you kind of get the sense that the kid was going to survive. But, like, I there was a point where I was really like, I don't know at all where this thing is going. And
exactly.
And in a
those
good
are the
way.
best kind of, those are the best kind of movies, the best kind of horror movies, definitely. So I definitely felt that. And again, we have this sort of, I like movies that take place in a short period of time. So it starts very early in the morning, the film. And then, so now this is only like, mid-morning by this point, where we're introduced to the other characters, or not even mid-morning. So it's still early on. And then, so we see more of these creatures. I guess we could also describe them as like these, I think they say it in the film as they call them nasty tadpoles or something like that. So that's another way, probably a better way to describe it. They do look like
tadpoles,
And they have multiple heads, and I guess it's called the Deadly Spawn because it's spawning all the bigger creatures, spawning all these smaller creatures. Or did the big one grow from the small ones? That was also, I was a little confused on that.
Well, I mean, so jumping ahead here a little bit, the full spoiler alerts, obviously. But we see at the very end of the film, we see this shot of this, the
amazing shot.
There's a shot of a house. It's also like painted, which I was just actually looking because I wanted to see something from the opening scene as we were talking here, and I had it pulled up, and you actually do see that very same shot right before we go to that couple that's killed. Like that's our establishing shot of that house. So it's really, which is very clever. It really sets. So essentially, obviously we assume you've seen the movie if you're listening to this, because if you haven't seen the movie and you're listening to this, none of this will make even a lick of sense.
Any sense.
But there's this shot at the end of the very last shot of the film where you see this little house with its lights on and this kind of big mountainous hill next to it, and then the hill kind of lifts up, and we see that it's actually a giant creature. The giant spawn creature or whatever. And so how I interpreted it is that creature was actually perhaps the initial one that landed, and that's been the one, maybe even because it's that big, releasing its spawn into the ground, and maybe that's how they got into the basement. If it's right next to the house like that, and it is interesting. I will say that nobody in the house noticed this hill had appeared out of nowhere.
So the hill wasn't even there. Well,
I don't know. It's unclear. I guess it could have been coming out of the ground, but if you kind of look at it how it emerges.
Well, they were busy. They had a lot going on that day.
They did have a lot going on. It's possible,
Didn't notice the mountain that emerged.
It does seem like the mountain was the creature a little bit, but who knows?
Right. No, you're right. Yeah. We'll definitely talk about that because I thought that was like breathtaking.
It was honestly amazing.
But before we get to that, we'll talk about a little bit more lots of fun horror scenes. I don't know how else to explain it, but just scenes where like scary fun things are happening, and like there's one scene where the woman's putting things down the garbage or down the sink, and one of the creatures is in the sink at the bottom of it and is acting sort of like a garbage disposal. And that scene, and like a couple of the scenes with the smaller Spawn creatures.
Hilarious.
Kind of, yeah, and it kind of reminded me of like Ghoulies or Gremlins. Movies like that with like these little creatures that are doing kind of funny things that are also a little scary. I wondered if movies like that, like I wondered if they were, I don't know. We joked about Steven Spielberg, but like, do you think they were influenced by this movie?
I mean, it's hard to know because with a movie like this, it's like I'm just thinking about a movie of this size coming out now, unless it was like a sleeper hit, like a Skinamarink or something like that. Realistically, probably not that many people were seeing this movie, but you never know.
The cult. Yeah, once it starts to have a cult following, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just something, I don't know, gleefully chaotic and like rebellious about those kind of like scenes in movies, and like and also about these kind of low budget practical effects horror films in general. So
you know what those things kind of made me think of a little bit, which is another film we've talked about, is the in Eraserhead. Some of the practical kind of puppetry and kind of things you see, and even down to the sound effects, like them kind of squeaking instead of hissing. It did feel, which is that
the lady in the radiator when she's stepping on the
she's stepping on the other spermatic little creatures. I don't know, maybe so, but it's definitely possible that Eraserhead was an influence on this. This coming 6 years after Eraserhead. Just in a bit of a different direction.
But
I don't know. It's just interesting kind of tracing the lineage of this kind of creature design and that kind of
You brought up a film that we talked about, Fiend Without a Face, right?
Yeah. I remember the Fiend Without a Face. They're kind of crawling brains with tails. I believe in that movie they were vertebrae. But they kind of bent, which I guess is what vertebrae do.
Same feel to it.
But yeah, they're kind of inching along kind of thing. Also,
and this movie does seem like it was influenced by those kind of movies. Like they pretty much allude to it in the movie itself with the younger brother character and stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's also just the going back to that opening shot. It's like just opening with the crash landing. And this kind of it's kind of more of a spooky feel. Obviously this movie's a little more gory than you would see in like a 50s movie, but kind of in the same way where like Brian De Palma basically just took Alfred Hitchcock movies and made them R-rated. It's like it feels like this movie is kind of taking 50s B horror and making it R-rated. I don't know, it definitely had just that feel. Another thing I was thinking about is like the characters. It's like I feel like in 50s horror movies it wasn't always kind of about one character like solving a mystery. It was often something kind of affecting a town, and this even though it was in one house, it was really this ensemble thing where it wasn't just like the one person fighting it. Like it was just there were tons of characters just coming in and out. The police officers, it had this real like kind of Americana down home
for sure
kind of feel.
It felt kind of like a throwback, but also like it was the 80s, and they were trying to up the ante a little bit with a lot of the gruesomeness and the blood and things like that. IMDb just asked me what I wanted to rate the Deadly Spawn. Sorry, it just popped up on my screen here. What do I rate the Deadly Spawn? That's a good question.
I don't know. We're not allowed to say. We don't give ratings on this show.
We don't give ratings. You're right. So we'll keep that under wraps. So to continue on with the film itself. So now this three-headed queen, this creature that I guess is kind of gotten larger in size. It's very much larger than the other ones that we've seen. It emerges from the basement finally, and we find out, or the younger brother Charles finds out, that it reacts to sound. And I kind of like missed that at first, but then when I was reading about it, I kind of put it together. But
it does not appear to have eyes.
Right,
it is an eyeless.
A lot of jaws, but. Yeah, no eyes.
No eyes, yeah.
But yeah, Charles is an interesting character. Like he's just like he seems not really fazed by anything. Like seeing the dead electrician that comes to the house or his dead mother. I don't know. It was kind of weird. Because movies back then didn't really talk about things like autism and at least not really the way that we would kind of approach it now.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's what they were going for, or I don't know. I think he's just maybe
he does have a kind of odd way of processing insane things.
Like, and maybe he has like his purpose, like he sees this as his purpose because he's watched all these movies and has been kind of obsessed with them and things
Yeah.
like that. So now he kind of gets to live out his own
Which
movie.
actually brings up an early scene that I feel like is important to discuss, which was when this, I guess he's a psychologist. Sits Charles down and kind of starts asking him questions about his, his relationship to monsters and if he believes they're real and really sees them, which is kind of, to be honest, it felt like kind of a heavier scene than the rest of the movie. Like, like this guy just, his
I didn't know what
family
they were going
leaves.
for. Yeah, I thought I kind of thought it was like a comedy scene because my mind just immediately went to Ghostbusters for some reason, like when like when Peter Venkman's doing things like that on the radio or whatever. I don't know. I just it was interesting. I didn't really. Why do you think that scene was in there specifically?
I don't know, because
do you think it's just like a character development thing? Or?
Maybe it was interesting because it just was like for a minute it just all of a sudden because it may have established that guy as like a psychologist, but I don't think it really dug too deep into it. But it was like I don't know. To me, it was kind of an unsettling scene. Like this kid's
it's like the only scene like that in there too.
Yeah, like this kid's family leaves and this guy just sits him down and is like, "I want to talk to you about something."
Yeah,
and
I was like, what is this guy gonna do?
Where's this going? And then
where is this going?
Like, is this gonna how disturbing is this movie gonna get? This feels very out of place. And then he starts asking him these questions, and the kid is kind of like shrugging him off a little bit. But you're like, oh, is the kid okay? Like, has something happened to this kid? Was there trauma or something? Yeah, which maybe we're reading too deep into it. Maybe it was just the director doing a kind of tongue-in-cheek thing, maybe about like this kid likes horror movies, he must be demented, as because I saw it in the director's Wikipedia, and once again there's no way to know if any of this is true, but it says as a child he taught himself the art of horror makeup, gaining notoriety by terrorizing local neighborhoods. Oh wow! So it's like it's one of those things you say, like maybe he inserted himself, and maybe that was just an experience he had that felt prescient and interesting to him, and so it found its way in. Yeah, it does. So it has like a little bit of that autobiographical feel to it. Some of it. I mean, it's probably a personal film, even if he didn't want it to be. I think maybe he was probably so young at the time, and just I don't know. It does have that feel to it. And even the bedroom. So the part I was going to talk about next is when the characters, all the kids that have come over for this study group, I guess, they barricade themselves inside the bedroom, and it's Charles' bedroom. And I liked in the background like all the allusions. I mean, obviously there are a lot of allusions to other sci-fi monster movies, things like that. But in the background there were some posters for films and things like that. So, and also like the fact that these things exist in the film. I guess one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, do you feel this film is tongue-in-cheek? You know what I mean? Like, did they know what they were doing? Did they care? It's really hard to say. And I think because, like, we can't know for sure. But, because, like, on the one hand, when you're making a movie like this, I don't think you have any illusions that you're, like, moving the needle of cinema in some massive way, like subject matter wise, like it wasn't a good way to put it. Like it wasn't like they were digging into anything really, like emotionally challenging. It wasn't like they were reinventing cinema in any way. So I don't think they had any illusions there that they were that they were making so the illusions that we see are kind of like making it known that this is a throwback in a way. And that's what I think it is. I think it was kind of a pastiche, not totally a pastiche because it wasn't like set in the 50s, but kind of an homage to a certain thing. And I don't think that they were doing it tongue in cheek in the sense that they were making fun of that thing or doing something to try to be funny. I think it was just that the thing that they were referencing was not really meant to be profound, and it was meant to be kind of trashy and wacky and weird. Not that there aren't some great 50s B movies. Like I love 50s B movies, but if you're doing something from a place of love towards those movies, you're probably not going to make something that is shooting too high. You're going to make something that doesn't take itself too seriously in the same way those movies didn't really take themselves too seriously.
Yeah, exactly. The movie is very 50s, but also very 80s at the same time.
Yeah.
Sort of, yeah.
Which is interesting. I'm reading It right now, Stephen King's It.
Oh, yeah, I read that.
Yeah, which is a behemoth of a book. But
it's behemoth, yep.
We think of, a Stephen King or like John Carpenter, or all these. Well, I guess Carpenter started in the 70s, but like a lot of these kind of very 80s horror figures, and we think of them as being so 80s, but in the same way that people are really into 80s now, and like Stranger Things came out and all that, there was a big 50s revival in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I think, it was a few years before the 80s, but starting with like an American Graffiti, but then, there were a lot of movies in the 80s and books that were just constantly referencing 50s culture. And so I think it was just a time...
Well, I guess it started in the 70s with Happy Days, right?
Yeah.
Was it? I believe that was the 70s when that started.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. That was definitely a thing.
And so I think it's just it kind of grew out of that, and so it's interesting though, like it's interesting because it extends, we're getting into a little bit of a cultural conversation, but it extends past movies, because it was like you had Ronald Reagan was the president in the 80s, and his whole thing was like, hearkening back to the 50s America, and so it's like it really extended, and it's like what we think of as 80s is really just kind of a more twisted R-rated version of 50s a lot of the time. It's like,
that's funny you say that, because another reference I was going to bring up that kind of, I just thought of it now, but the 80s remake of the 50s movie, which we talked about on the show, The Blob. We talked about the 50s one on the show mostly, but there's an 80s version, and it's funny because it's a remake of the 50s one, but it's just very over the top and very gory and like sort of gruesome in a lot of parts. And so this has a little bit of that. Like it's not totally, I don't think it's like that violent, but there's so the part that we're at, the film that we're talking about, where they're in the bedroom, a girl's head gets bit off and it falls through the window, which I think I was like laughing at, obviously, because it's so ridiculous. But yeah, there's scenes like that too in the film, and a lot of them actually. But
that one was pretty wild though. I wasn't really expecting that. I was like,
exactly. I think that's why I laughed, because I was just like, oh, okay,
all right,
fell out the window. All right.
It was kind of thrown out the window.
Yeah, it's, right. So you see someone like heaving it, like just out of the shot, probably. So yeah, Charles again is sort of the only character who seems to like prepared for this, and it seemed like kind of like knows what to do. So he concocts another plan, as the others are now trapped. So now they're trapped in the bedroom, and then they're trapped in the attic. They kind of go all the way up. So it's kind of cool. Like the film starts in the basement, and then it ends in the attic, I guess, with the creature coming in, and he builds this makeshift dummy with his fake zombie head, and lures the creature away, and then stabs it in one of its mouths. And eventually, now this is interesting, because this also reminds me a lot of Little Shop of Horrors, but he's able to electrocute it and makes it explode. And that's how they supposedly get rid of the creature, which is exactly how he gets rid of the creature in Little Shop of Horrors, interestingly enough. So it cuts to some shots of the neighborhood of the police officers and townspeople using the same technique to kill off all the lingering spawn that's still outside and slithering around. And so at that point I was like, all right, the kid's in the car, got the blanket around him, they're taking him away, movie's over. No, this movie is not over.
It's just getting started.
No, it's, because overall I would say this movie is very short and sweet. It's the runtime is like an hour and 20 something minutes.
Just over 80 minutes with credit, with an opening credit sequence and a closing credit sequence. So really probably more like a 78, 79 minutes of actual runtime.
Right. So whereas American Werewolf in London, whereas that ended very abruptly, and at just the right moment, as the character is killed. This one sort of, I thought, kind of lingered a little bit. Like it continues on for a bit after the main conflict is over, and to the point where I was like, all right, like kind of looking up. If I had to watch, I would look at it like, all right. So, like I really enjoyed the film, but I was kind of like, I didn't know where it was going. I just kind of, and then, but the payoff though, as we talked about, Jeremy, is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And definitely worth it, I think. So we eventually go back to the main site of the meteorite landing from the beginning. And one of the police officers is on his walkie-talkie or whatever, his radio, and he's just talking about like how they just keep growing, and talking about the creatures, and then he sees something in the distance, and at first it's a hill that we're seeing, like a kind of like a mountainous hill as you described it, and then the hill begins to move, and that's when we see that the creature has. Now, I'm not sure if it's the same creature or not, but one of these creatures, one of these spermious tadpole, like
we've found. I think we're
inventing
described the word
but...
sperm at least 4 different ways. Spermatic, spermy, spermious.
Yeah, I'll tag it with that, and when I
Spermaroni.
One of these things has grown so large that it is now takes up the entire side of this mountain next to the house. And implying that these things get pretty damn large indeed. So, but yeah, really cool ending. Like kind of like jaw dropping. Actually, I did not expect it at all.
No, it was totally. I was like, all right, we're just holding on this still shot of house for a little while.
I was like, I enjoy the matte painting, but I mean, I don't know. Oh, okay. So, but then when you see it start to move, and this also, again, I keep going back to it, but Little Shop of Horrors, I'm gonna dive in because this is like one of my favorite movies. But there's an alternate ending where the plants take over the earth, essentially. And they actually shot it, which is crazy to me. And you can see this footage of these miniatures, these miniature plants that are meant to look like they're essentially Godzilla taking over the world. And so that is the original ending of the play and the original ending of the film. And this, again, reminded me of that because it's implying that, these things are growing so large that they're going to take over the entire planet. They're going to take over.
Oh, there's no stopping
these aliens things. Are going to, they're taking over. So, so I thought that was really cool. So that's the Deadly Spawn, and I really enjoyed it. And for one that we really went into this cold, Jeremy. I mean, one that we literally saw the name, the poster. I maybe watched like 2 seconds of the trailer, and I was like, okay. Yeah, let's give it a shot. And we didn't even know if we were going to end up talking about it or not. We just were like, all right, let's watch it, see what we think. But
we weren't sure if it would fit the description of creature feature.
Right.
And it ended up being one of the creaturiest features that you could maybe ever find.
Definitely, yeah. This was all about the creature from beginning to end. Really
it's honestly hard to think of a movie that's really just more about the creature than this. This is really just.
I mean,
all
maybe
about
Jaws, but
maybe
even Jaws, you don't see the creature.
You don't really see it. This one is really just all the name of the creature is the movie. It's like it's the Deadly Spawn. It's like
plus you get the little bonus creatures with the little baby ones too, the little tadpole ones. So yeah, this movie pretty much has it all in terms of creature feature and horror movies of especially of the 80s. Yeah, and a throwback to the 50s, like we talked about. And then there's just some, there wasn't many facts. Like there wasn't too much research I could do into this film, but I just wanted to mention a couple of things that I thought were interesting, at least. So in some territories, this film's title was changed to "Return of the Aliens: The Deadly Spawn" or "The Return of the Aliens: Deadly Spawn," and this was all in an attempt to cash in on the worldwide success of Ridley Scott's 1979 film Alien. The audacity. Yeah. The audacity. That's something you can never get away with now. But
no.
That's
well, you could get away with it now. You could get away with it now, but everyone would call you out on it.
Everyone would call you out on it, yeah, for sure.
Back then that was kind of just par for the course, but now if you tried that, people would kind of be like, I see what you're doing.
Yeah. Exactly. And then also another thing I saw was the producer Ted Bohus said that he conceived the idea for Deadly Spawn in 1979, and that he was inspired by an article in National Geographic about seed pods that were recovered from the Arctic. And according to him, he created an initial creature design that involved a man in a suit, but associate producer and effects director John Dodds was unenthusiastic about that prospect. Several days later, Dodds returned with several alternatives, including the mother spawn that was eventually used in the film, which was the right way to go, I think, for this. Although it would have given it even more of a 50s vibe if it was a guy in a suit.
The guy in a suit.
I can't even imagine it.
You see his face poking out from behind those teeth.
Yeah, that would be something. It'd be interesting to see, but I'm
glad. I think they made the right choice. I think
it's such a cool creation.
Yeah, and I think it's like, I mean, anytime you're talking about someone doing something that's an homage, you always want it to be an homage, but you also want it to be of its time. And I think what they pulled off with this movie was much more of its time than had it just been someone in a suit. Yeah, and we mentioned this when we were just talking before we started recording, but not really any notable names in the film. Douglas, the director Douglas McKeown. We're not sure. If anyone knows how to say his name, let us know. Yeah, please let us know. But he, again, unfortunately passed away last year, and this was the only film that he directed. He did write one book that we were able to find, but this is the only film, and I looked up the credits of the other two writers. One of them is Ted A. Bohus, and he directed a couple things that I know nothing about, exactly zero about, but I feel we would be into them. So one of the movies, they're all from the 90s, or a couple of them are from the 90s. One is called Regenerated Man. Another one's called Vampire Vixens from Venus. So that's 94 and 95. And then he has a couple more, 2010 and 2012. So again, I know absolutely nothing about those, but maybe worth checking out. Who knows? And then John Dodds was more of a special effects guy, and he went on to work on actually some pretty notable things here. Poltergeist 3. Black Roses, which I know has another pretty big cult following. Oh, we mentioned Ghostbusters. He worked on Ghostbusters 2. The show Monsters, which is a really weird show. I don't know what else to say about it. It's like kind of like a serial show where it's like a different story each week, but it's like takes place in this family of monsters home, and they're watching it on TV. It's kind of interesting. But yeah, so he worked on some special effects projects that were pretty cool. Just to kind of sum everything up here, ironically enough, I think it's a website. It's called Cool Ass Cinema. So ironically enough, I think Cool Ass Cinema put it best. They wrote that the film is not out to win any awards. It's simply there to entertain, and in the most energetically gruesome fashion possible, which I agree with. I thought that was pretty apt of this film. But yeah, that's the Deadly Spawn. Any parting words on this one, Jeremy? Yeah, so I have a couple things, just a couple moments. So I know you said you didn't love the ending, like not the very ending, obviously, but the kind of like dragging ending. But I actually kind of enjoyed that. I mean, looking back on it, I think it's brilliant. I think it's great. But, and even if it hadn't had that like terrific final shot, I feel like there's this thing with horror movies, which I'm kind of contradicting myself, because when we were talking about American Werewolf in London, I said I loved how much it just got out and just ended quickly and did. Well, not every movie has, but but not everyone has, and I think it was kind of cool that like. We see horror movies so often, and then kind of the traditional thing is either just end the movie there or to kind of jump to an epilogue, 6 months later. And it's like seldom do we see the cleanup and process that follows a trail of death and destruction. And the kind of, and I was just like, it was kind of cool just seeing them just like electrocuting the little wormy, spawns. And it really makes you think that they've taken care of the problem, like they figured it out, and they're going to get rid of all the alien, it's over creatures. So I like that, and I honestly feel like well, I think it's also cool because
Yeah, and like the younger brother character who's kind of seen as like this reject character almost, like it's kind of cool that he's the one who figures out how to save the day, and like everyone kind of copies what he does, and it's pretty cool.
And I think
I definitely didn't hate it. Like I just was kind of like I really didn't know where it was going.
Yeah.
And I just kind of felt like it was petering off, but then when it came back, it came back with a.
I found myself watching that and like kind of thinking that in a film that was maybe a little more like, a little darker, a little more, like kind of dealt with something and kind of was a little more serious, for lack of a better term, like that really scared you. Like if that was at the end of like, a film like The Exorcist or something like that, where you were like genuinely terrified throughout, and then at the end it just shows this kind of cleanup of the carnage, would be a really great,
like they're cleaning up the room in The Exorcist.
But like, how kind of scary that is, like seeing the people who are responsible for that and just for a few minutes just kind of being with them and seeing like, because when we're in it, when we're watching horror movies, we will accept things and kind of just, but like then to actually see someone have to come in and deal with all this like blood. Like I remember one time I have a friend who's a nurse, and we went to see The Green Inferno by Eli Roth.
Oh my God, yeah, I've seen that movie.
A really over the top. My girlfriend is Peruvian, and that movie's set in Peru, and she's like, "Why are all the cannibals always in Peru?" But I digress. But I was talking to my friend who is
it's a wild one.
My friend who was a nurse at the time, and she was like, I was like, "What do you think of the film?" And she was like, "I can smell the iron from the blood." It's like someone who actually deals with that in real life. It's like, oh, the iron. And I was like, oh, that really always stuck with me. So that's one thing. The other thing I wanted
the Deadly Spawn has a lot of blood splattered on the walls.
Yeah. So actually, sorry, and I'm kind of rambling. Two more quick things.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
One, very short. The creature, the dripping from the teeth was amazing. Creatures in movies are too often, they're very dry. They kind of look like leathery.
Yeah.
And this one was like sopping wet.
Felt wet. Yeah.
It was this creature was. This was a wet creature, but it just and it's like
sopping wet creature.
And like the spit, it didn't even just look like water. Like I don't know what they used to make it, but it kind of had this like gross, foamy, milky. It was really interesting. It was like it was coming from inside the mouth too.
You're right. Yeah.
I was thinking like, is there like some kind of a capillary system or like I don't know. It was so that was
or like how some creatures have like this kind of acid like saliva like I don't know. It makes you think. Yeah, it adds like dimensions to it.
Like it felt gross. Like I was watching, I was like, I would not want. I'm not super scared of the creature itself, but I would not want that shit to touch me. Pardon my French.
Yeah, I would not get near that sopping wet mouth of that creature.
And then the last scene, which we can't end this episode without discussing, is there's a scene in this film when we kind of touched on it when all these old women are coming over. Because the matriarch of this family is kind of making some type of lunch for everyone, and one of these little spermatose creatures ends up in the sink, but she ends up accidentally, because it's hidden in a bundle of herbs, she ends up tossing it into the blender and blends it up into whatever she's making, which is a very bizarre looking concoction. It's like kind of this mint green goo liquid that you would only ever see as something someone would eat in an 80s movie.
There's a scene like that in Gremlins too, where it goes in the juicer, I think.
The juicer, yeah. And she gives it to all of her friends, which was one of the most hysterical moments in this movie. Oh yeah, because it's all of her friends sitting there trying not to say something when her food is so bad, but then she takes a bite of it herself and kind of has this reaction where it's just, you see the I don't know who that woman is, but I thought she'd give a pretty
I think she's the mother. The actress.
The actress, yeah. But like you just see the social humiliation in her face of knowing that she served something so terrible to all of her friends who she knows are judging this dish. And then immediately these things just show up en masse and just start killing all of these little sweet old ladies who are having their lunch party.
They fight back though. They're pretty.
They do fight back, but
spry.
I thought that scene was hysterical and like worked on a level that transcended horror. It was just it was like great social satire.
Yeah, it felt almost like a different movie at that point, but like
Yeah.
in a good way. It was like a cool like offshoot kind
even
of thing
like
that was
when
happening.
even like the little like squeaking sound that the worm kind of thing makes when she throws it in the
Right.
in the food processor. It's just, it was a little bit of a break from the rest of the movie, but I thought it was just hysterically funny.
Yeah, because at first you're kind of like, what? So why are we going off on this tangent of
Yeah.
her, like, it's like his aunt is going to like see her mother and all these other older women, and at first you're kind of like not really sure why, but then you get that great scene, which is why they did it essentially. Which again, it's like, economical filmmaking.
Sometimes you just write a great scene, and even if it's not moving the movie forward, really.
Yeah, like maybe you have an idea, you're like, oh, this would be cool to see, or
it's just too good not to put in.
Yeah, it's one of those scenes for sure. And there's a lot of scenes like that in this.
Yeah.
So I always appreciate that. And again, like the super low budget, homemade horror, which will probably have to be a series at some point.
Yeah.
But that will end this episode of Cult Movie Cult. Next time on the show, we will be discussing a much larger budget film, which will be Little Shop of Horrors, which I'm very excited to talk about. So we will see you next time. Until then, thank you for listening to Cult Movie Cult. You can find us on the usual social media. If you have any cult films you'd like to hear us discuss on the show, or if you'd like to officially join the cult, be a guest on the show, please feel free to reach out to us at cultmoviecult@gmail.com. This has been Cult Movie Cult, and until next time, so long from the other side.